All right, so wrapping up round one, one thought to have here is about the inevitability of the Cold War. We talked about inevitability of World War One, of World War Two. When did it become inevitable? By the time we get to the end of round one, the path forward is clearly going to be tension and Cold War. Is there something that could have been done before that? So something we've already talked about, or was it unavoidable? Was the differences between the Soviet Union and the long history they had with the West, was that too much and not able to get past? So as we enter round two, it is the shortest of all of our rounds, and again, all of these rounds are just made up by me. They're not official in any way, shape, or form. Um, and so we're going to see some interesting developments here. Whereas the first round that we did was basically all tension, all escalating of tensions. And it also was all focused in Europe, almost all of it focused exclusively in Germany. In round two, we're going to see an easing of tensions at time, but alongside escalation. And the reason that's able to happen is because the venues of the Cold War are going to be widening. They're going to get bigger. And so we're going to see some places ease down and some places intensify. As we're going through this, actually, mark each slide, whether you think that intensifies, escalates the tensions, or if it helps ease them and bring them down. So let's start with the H-bomb. So this is the hydrogen bomb. The U.S. detonated the first hydrogen bomb in 1952. The hydrogen bomb is thousands of times more powerful than the atomic bomb. Thousands of times more. The best way I ever had it described to me was that the atomic bomb is a city destroyer. The hydrogen bomb will destroy a county. And so if that helps put in perspective a little bit here. Now, we developed our first hydrogen bomb, detonated in 1952, and figured we were about a decade ahead of the Soviet Union. Figured once again we would have an incredible advantage in military technology. However, the Soviet Union detonated their hydrogen bomb in 1953. So either our intelligence was way off or something else happened, and actually it was both. The Soviet Union was able to develop their hydrogen bomb so quickly because they had spies in our program, and they were able to basically get and buy and blackmail for a bunch of the technological developments necessary for this bomb. And so this is just a really strong example of the use of espionage in the Cold War. One other thing, if you want an example of how much bigger a hydrogen bomb is than an atomic bomb, a hydrogen bomb uses an atomic bomb to start its explosion, to start its chain reaction. That's how much bigger it is. So that's the H-bomb. 1953, Stalin dies. Great movie, by the way. So Stalin dies in 1953. He had made virtually no plans for his succession. There wasn't nobody could talk about what was going to happen after he was gone, and he certainly didn't. And so this is going to initiate a 3-year struggle for power, where there's really kind of a power vacuum in the Soviet Union. There's some leadership questions. But you got to think about what this man has done. I mean, he wasn't really big in the original Russian Revolution of 1917, but immediately after that, in the Civil War, in the events afterwards, the struggle for power with Trotsky, for most Russians, he is the only leader that they know. He's the only person that they remember. And so this is monumental. And on a world stage, this is big too. I mean, this is the man who is largely responsible for winning World War II, for defeating Hitler and the Nazis. And so this is a big moment. The man who is ultimately going to succeed him after some of the power struggle, his name is Nikita Khrushchev. And Khrushchev wanted what he called peaceful coexistence. He wanted to exist with the West, not in conflict. He said basically, there doesn't need to be conflict between us. We can exist and you can exist, and we don't need to cross. He also began the process of de-Stalinization. Basically, he was trying to undo the worst excesses of Stalin's regime. Undo the cult of personality, the Gulag labor system. Um, he's going to have less centralization around just him and just the party. Not excuse me, not the party. The Politburo itself. So he's trying to decentralize. He's abandoning the collectivization policies of the 5-year plans. And so he's really trying to do a lot, or trying to undo a lot of what he saw as the damage that Stalin did. But you see in the picture on the right there, he has big shoes to fill with Stalin. So next, and again, don't forget you're marking whether this is an easing of tensions or a heightening of tensions. Next, we have the creation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. This is in response to NATO. This is the Eastern version of NATO. And so, just looking at the map, this is the same kind of thing. An attack on one is an attack on all. They're going to pull their resources. They're all going to work together. And again, looking at the map, you can see just how comical this relationship is. You have the entirety of the Soviet Union and then all of the tiny little satellite states. So again, these are the satellite states. This is the Eastern Bloc countries that are joining together with the Soviet Union. There's always supposed to be a Russian general in charge of Warsaw Pact troops. And once Hungary and Romania joined, the Soviet troops that were there were supposed to be pulled out, but they never were. And so this is, again, a direct response to what the Soviet Union saw as the threat from NATO, which is still kind of playing itself out today in Russia with Ukraine. That same year, West Germany is going to join NATO. Essentially, West Germany proves it's a real boy, and the Allies end occupation. So the Allies are no longer going to be occupying, and this is a really important step in the country's post-war rehabilitation. They are going to rule themselves. And when they rule themselves, they get to join NATO. They get to join the big kids club. This was really rushed along because it's going to allow Germany to literally be on the front line of defense for Western Europe during the Cold War. And it was also a huge slap in the face to the Soviet Union. Soviet Union is still rebuilding. The Eastern satellite states, the Eastern Bloc, are still way behind where West Germany is. And this is just kind of a thumb in the nose to the Soviet Union, because West Germany is booming here. The following year, we have the Hungarian uprising, which I know is mentioned in your reading. Basically, this was an uprising against the Soviet-led communist rule in Hungary. It forced out the government. It said they were going to have free and open elections with any parties that wanted to go. They announced that they were leaving the Warsaw Pact. And this really was a step that looked like it could end communist rule in Hungary. They weren't the first. There was a little uprising in East Germany a couple years earlier, and a little uprising in Poland. But this is the first major one to oust the government and say they are going to replace it with something new. Now, the Soviet Union was really slow to respond. They didn't really take this event seriously. They thought that they'd be able to regain control easily. And they didn't, like I said, they basically didn't respond. When it was clear that this wasn't going to reverse on its own, they rolled in the tanks. They brought in the tanks. It was violently put down. And this is a very big moment because if you remember the Truman Doctrine said that we were going to defend people against turning communist. But we don't go in here. The U.S., NATO, nobody goes in here. UN condemned it, but that's it. And essentially, we decided not to use the Truman Doctrine, not to apply it, and basically we're conceding Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. We're saying that is your sphere, if we want to look at spheres of influence again. So we are conceding that to the Soviet Union. Couple things that it really angered Western Marxists. A lot of Western Marxists, those people who were leftists, who were really hoping the Soviet Union would succeed, And then after Stalin was ousted, they were like, "Oh, this is finally the moment. Like he hijacked the whole revolution, and now this is when things are going to be good." And the way that this was put down just really made it clear that it was going to be more of the same. The pictures down here at the bottom, there was one Western journalist. There was a few Western journalists, but there was one in particular who happened to be taking pictures of these young men, these young officers, Hungarian officers, as they were rounded up. And the journalist was being pushed away, was being shooed away. And as he was being pushed away, he kind of kept taking pictures over his shoulders. And as that happened, the Soviet army, it was Warsaw Pact troops. Warsaw Pact troops opened fire on them and just summarily executed them. So, and he was able to get those pictures out there, published in Life magazine. So it just showed the cruel excess of life in the Soviet regime. So yeah, so that Hungarian uprising just kind of shows the discontent with Soviet rule, with Soviet domination, I should say. Even from this early point, 1956, people wanted to get out. People wanted to go. Now, happening at the same time as that, I forgot. This Hungarian Revolution, the flag with the communist seal cut out of the middle became a symbol of the revolution. We'll actually see that again when we get to the 80s, 90s. Happening at the same time as the Hungarian uprising is the Suez Crisis. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but essentially, if you remember, the Suez Canal is so important to Britain because of Egypt, connecting them much closer. The French built it, the English took it. Basically, Egypt is going to seize on England decolonizing and losing its strength, and Egypt seizes it. Egypt nationalizes the Suez Canal. They say this is ours, as opposed to England taking things from Egypt. Egypt is backed by the Soviet Union, largely because Israel is backed by the United States. And so France and Great Britain agree they're going to work together. They're going to invade Egypt, and they want to take the canal back. And they figure they'll have the U.S.'s backing because Egypt is backed by the Soviet Union. But then the U.S. steps up and condemns the attack. And Great Britain's like, hey, we're supposed to be allowed to do what we want to do. And the United States is like, no, that's not the way it rolls anymore. We're kind of in charge now. And Great Britain's like, no, we'll still do what we want. And the U.S. basically threatens to devalue the pound, threatens to dump a bunch of pounds on the open market and devalue it. And Britain has to back down. And this is one of the demonstrations here. One of the things this shows is that NATO allies can fall out temporarily. They're not always on the same side agreeing. What it really showed in the important conversation for us is Great Britain could no longer dictate policy. Great Britain was no longer the one deciding where the maps and deciding who was going where. They were going to rely more on NATO and the U.S. and that special relationship. Also, for Great Britain, the idea of empire just kind of becomes less popular. It seems like a relic of the old world, a relic of before World War II. And they feel like they really need to focus on domestic issues here. A famous line by Khrushchev, or a famous speech he gave here, said about the capitalist states, it doesn't depend on whether we exist. If you don't like us, don't accept our invitations, and don't invite us to come see you. Whether you like it or not, history is on our side. We will bury you. So this sounds very aggressive, and it is to a certain extent. Khrushchev was a pretty fiery guy. But I want you to think about this for a second like a Marxist would. Think about the Marxist timeline. What does a Marxist think is going to happen to capitalism? It's going to kill itself eventually. It cannot last. It is unsustainable. And if we look at the translation here, the "we will bury you" can also be translated into English from the Russian as "we will outlast you," which doesn't sound quite as threatening. That just says we're going to be around after you're gone. But regardless of how he intended it or what he meant or how we can parse the words as a Marxist now, at the time this was very fiery rhetoric. And so even though he's talking about peaceful coexistence and he's talking about détente, it's this kind of fiery rhetoric goes a little bit different than that. So as we get to the end of round two, um, there's basically a stalemate in Europe. The Soviet Union failed to gain any more land than they had at the end of World War II. So basically, just where their boots were at the end of World War II is where they ended up. So they failed to get any more land since the end of World War II. Yugoslavia is separate. Yugoslavia is communist, but not tied to the Soviet Union. They're led by Tito, who we met during World War II. So they're communist, but not tied to the Soviet Union. Austria is neutral, not in any alliance here. They're actually occupied by the United States, or by the big powers still too at this point. But what we see is just what Churchill talked about. We see a sharp divide between East and West. And that is going to last throughout the duration of the Cold War. So at the end of round two, there's the firm belief that America and America and the Soviet Union are the only two superpowers in the left. Britain, France can't pretend to be that anymore as they're losing their empires, they're losing their influence. So there's the firm belief that America and Russia are the only two superpowers. There is a cautious calm as kind of the nations turn to domestic issues. They kind of got over these two big events, or these two big rounds of a lot of going on and coming close to crisis. Something I want you to think about, besides how you would describe round two, is, was the world in a better place at the end of round two than it was at the end of round one? Look at your tensions, if you marked the tensions up or down. And then the last thing I just want to mention real quick is the Cold War in Asia, just very quickly here, because it's much more the United States, but there's some relevant points. Basically, the U.S. is going to help rebuild Japan, and they're going to become an economic powerhouse. China goes communist in 1949, so jumping back just a little bit here. Mao won, the communists won over the nationalists, so China is now communist. And then briefly we have the Korean War, which is essentially the term you need to know. There's the domino theory. The domino theory is that if one Asian nation falls, all of them will. So that domino theory was an important one. And then this is also what we call a proxy war. Proxy means a substitute. And so we weren't fighting the Soviet Union directly, because if we did, there was the risk of nuclear war. And so this is us fighting the Soviet allies fighting us. And so this is the United Nations. It's a police action. It's the first time they're getting involved in something like that. Basically the war goes on for 3 years, and then they draw a line dividing it, which is where the line still is today, at the 83rd parallel. So just some real quick stuff in Asia for the Cold War there. So again, this is kind of spheres of influence again. Soviet sphere, Western sphere. So that is the end of our mythical round two. We will touch base with you as we talk about some domestic issues, talk about some economic issues, coming up pretty soon here. Thank you. Later.